Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, October 17th, 2024. On the show today, we are going to talk about undersowing cover crops, what I would grow if I could grow anything. But first, we're going to get some insights from you all from the week. So let's do it. It is the second frosty morning in a row here. Got our first frost of the fall-winter season yesterday morning and our second this morning, which means we are officially probably no longer picking cherry tomatoes out of the field. It is amazing how far those things will go when the weather is right. And by right, I mean abnormally dry and warm. And when you plant them later in the season. I think those cherry tomatoes went into the ground probably in like late June or early July. I'd have to look, but I love the late field tomatoes when it's dry and hot and the tomatoes are not as disease prone as they are early in the season when it's still kind of wet. And I love how sweet they get after that first cold snap if it's not too frosty and kills them off. Honestly, although tomatoes and cherry tomatoes will go right up to a frost, I really love peppers in the field when you've got that opportunity. Like when you plant them and you can harvest them all the way up into November when you get those first hard frosts. That's the best. I want peppers all the time. I love peppers. Okay, so since I will not be doing a show tomorrow because I will be doing a talk at the Kentucky Composting Conference in Louisville, I thought I would do the Friday feedback thing a bit today on this Thursday, where we look back at some of the interesting things you all were contributing and discussing this week. Also, we will have a regular Farmer Jesse video for you on Sunday, for those of you who watch on YouTube. So hopefully that will make up for a little bit of my absence tomorrow. First, I want to shout out this story that came in yesterday after I shared our farm name story and then asked you all for your farm names and farm name stories. This one is from @StuckInTheMudGarden7726, who writes, "Our farm name is Stuck in the Mud Farm. When my wife, kids, and I were building our house, it was a really wet year. We had this older neighbor who would stop by every day and harass me. I got everything you can imagine stuck in the mud: pickup trucks, tractor, dump trucks, and a crane, 60 inches of rain and rocky clay. This neighbor, who we ended up loving, hated at the time, would always say, how's it going at Stuck in the Mud Farm?" So the name stuck. Ted passed in 2020 from COVID. Our farm name reminds me of him. End quote. I love this story, and although I don't know this neighbor, I know this neighbor. We have had several Teds in our life over the years, including one named Sam, who also recently passed away. I cannot say enough about the value and importance of neighbors. I think a lot of us who are wanting to grow food are moving into areas where we did not grow up and are not a part of that community. And it can be jarring to some people to meet people like Ted, who are kind of up in your business right away. But a good neighbor can truly enrich the experience of living in the countryside. Absolutely, bad neighbors can have the opposite effect, but a lot of the old timers who live in rural areas have watched their communities get depleted by, their children often leaving for cities for better jobs. And I find most of those folks are actually excited to see new people moving in and want you to succeed, and they want to help. Older farming communities also have traditions of just stopping by and chatting. We always, no matter how busy we are, take the time to chat with neighbors. I will do whole shows on neighbors at some point because we have had so many great and helpful experiences over the years. Neighbors can be an incredible asset to what you're doing, and you can be an asset to them as well, and you should be. If a neighbor ever asks you for help, they need help. It's sort of an unspoken currency of rural communities that everyone helps each other whenever they can, just in case they themselves might one day need help. It almost becomes a generosity competition where they want to help you more than you have helped them, so they always kind of have that on you. I mean, it's brilliant, really. It's the only currency we should really ever be using. And they are good at finding ways to help. Been doing it for generations. Anyway, neighbors are a huge part of this farming thing, whether or not you invite it. So more on them in the future. Thanks for the comment, Stuck in the Mud. Shouts to Ted and shouts to our dear bug tussle neighbor who recently passed, Mr. Sam Holder. The second comment is from Lamb's Quarters Farm, from the episode I did about do you have to sacrifice ecology to make money, where I said that I feel we are exceedingly hard on farmers about using plastic and not enough on other industries who just use it seemingly for goofs. and use the example of how plastic Legos unnecessarily come in small, flimsy plastic bags. Anyway, Lambsquarter's Farm wrote, "The commentary on plastics is difficult to hear. The we're too hard on farmers, look at these industries, that's a politician's tricks. Why should we be better when they are worse? Ugh, what percentage of our brain is made up of microplastics now? How are we ingesting them? Should we look at our food? Are farmers to blame or Lego?" End quote. So actually, based on the available research, more so Lego, or specifically one-time use packaging, clothing, water bottles, etc. This is one of those sense does not make science moments that I am always talking about, that just because something makes sense to us does not mean it makes science. And I'm not trying to pick on you here, Lambsquarters, because I am liable to, if not likely to, do the same thing at times, even on this show. Because sure, it would make sense that the microplastics they are finding in the human body embedded in our organs are from the food we eat, and certainly that can happen. But according to the research, the majority of microplastics are actually entering through other means, or they are entering farmland, not necessarily or even primarily through that farm's plastic usage. I'll explain. A 2024 editorial published in Nature called "Microplastics Are Everywhere. We Need to Understand How They Affect Human Health." And in this editorial, it says, quote, "Microplastics and nanoplastics enter the body mainly through ingestion or inhalation. For example, one might ingest microplastics and nanoplastics by drinking liquid or eating food that has been stored or heated in plastic containers from which microplastics and nanoplastics have leached, or by using toothpaste containing microplastics and nanoplastics. One startling study found that infants may be exposed to high levels of microplastics by ingesting formula prepared in propylene feeding bottles." End quote. A 2024 Wirecutter article published in the New York Times spoke with 3 doctors and a research scientist on the subject of how to avoid microplastics, and the answers were mostly about cutting back on single-use plastics, don't use plastic cutting boards, don't microwave in plastic containers, don't reuse single-use plastics, filter your water, and clean your house a lot because a large percentage of the microplastics we consume are actually inhaled. They're just floating around in the air. Another giant source of microplastics comes from the sea. A 2022 study found hundreds of microplastic particles in a single can of tuna. A single can? Sea salt is actually a surprisingly simple way microplastics enter our bodies, though it is not clear if it is the processing of the salt or the source of the salt where the most microplastics contaminate the salt. And it gets into those things through single-use plastics breaking down in the ocean. On farmland, things like plastic mulches and row covers are definitely a source of microplastics, but the main sources are things like irrigation water, synthetic fertilizers that contain microplastics, and biosolids, which are a huge contributor of microplastics, as well as potentially PFAS. In fact, a lot of the microplastic pollution within biosolids comes from when we wash our synthetic clothing. Tiny fragments break off of our clothing, and that wastewater flows into the biosolid stream, which is sometimes redistributed on farmland. So farmers are culpable, like I mentioned in that episode when I said that farmers need to be conscientious and minimalist about how and where they are employing plastics, especially against the soil. And farmers should do everything they can to cut back on plastic usage because it is indeed a source of microplastics. All plastic usage is. But my point is simply that farmers are not the main source of microplastics in the environment, even if they are sometimes the inadvertent distributor of them. In essence, yes, farmers do contribute, absolutely, but this time it is not a whataboutism or a politician's trick to blame one-time use plastics in other industries where plastic is not necessary, because that's just where the science points us when it comes to where these microplastics are entering the food stream and our bodies at the highest level. It's every plastic bottle we use, every time we heat something in plastic, every time we wash some synthetic clothes, even driving down the road as our tires chip away on the street is an absolutely gargantuan source of microplastics. Of course, my goal is not to help anyone justify willy-nilly plastic usage on farms. We should all always be doing better when it comes to plastics, farmer or not. We can find ecological alternatives to those sources of microplastic, fertility, weed protection, and so on. There are non-plastic options for those. My goal is to simply say that the world should hesitate to point the finger at farmers when it is the world causing the majority of the problem for themselves, and frankly, causing a lot of the microplastics problems for the farmers. In other words, if people want microplastics out of their food, and they should, it's not great, It largely starts with their decisions and the decisions of so many large industries who choose to use one-time use plastics, not just the farmer. I appreciate the pushback, though, Lamb's Quarters Farm, and I could have been more clear in that episode, I'm sure. I'll put several citations in the show notes if anyone wants to learn more about this particular topic. A question from our Patreon members is going to be next. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process, so make sure to check them out. If you, the listener, want to support our work, you can do so at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Hopefully this show saves you at least $2 or $5 per month through farming advice, or provides at least a handful of dollar bills or pounds or euros or whatever per month worth of entertainment. I mean, truly try to imagine your Thursday without a 5 or 10 minute rant on microplastics, right? Anyway, today's question comes from Patreon member Megan, who asks, have you ever experimented with understory cover crops? I know you have done interplantings of lettuce, etc. under tomatoes. Approaching the garden flip, I felt my soil would benefit from a cover crop and wondered if that was a thing. Buckwheat thrown under tomatoes or between beans as they finish out, etc. End quote. Okay, so thanks, Megan. I love this question. I have discussed relaying cover crops before, I'm sure, somewhere, probably on our YouTube channel. But here's what you need to know about this particular idea. The most important thing with successful cover cropping is that it has to be treated like any other crop. So if this is something you want to do, you will have to make sure the cover crop has everything it needs to succeed, because what you don't want is to just put some seeds down that don't germinate until the next season or cropping, or don't succeed if they do germinate because the weeds outcompete them. So first, start with looking at the preparation of the bed under the tomatoes or peppers or whatever, the beans. If that crop is weedy, you're going to have to deal with that before you undersow a cover crop. Next, you'll want to look at which species make the most sense for the time of year and for your abilities to terminate them. There is no bigger mistake in cover cropping than planting something winter hardy like rye in a bed you will be wanting to plant in March. That cover crop, depending on your climate, will not be ready to terminate by March. So really think about what the plan is for that bed before you sow anything. Also think about how well prepared the soil is to germinate a cover crop. Sometimes by the end of the season, the bed can be a little bit compacted at the surface. You will, at very least, want to scuffle hoe the top inch or so unless you have a nice fluffy soil or compost mulch to utilize. Like any crop, cover crops need good seed to soil contact and good moisture to germinate. You mentioned buckwheat, and that's great. I have no issues with buckwheat because it is fast growing and it is easy to kill, but it doesn't germinate that well on the soil surface. So it has to be raked in or sown with a seeder. It has to get that good seed to soil contact and moisture. Also, I should say this late in the season, buckwheat won't really germinate or really grow here. So if you are not in a pretty warm climate, like I would say like deep in the south or even in, the southern hemisphere, buckwheat season is pretty much kaput. I really like crimson clover for this job. It is a winter hardy cover crop, so you will have to have a plan in the spring for termination, but it germinates really well right there on the surface so long as the moisture is there. You can just broadcast it in the bed, lightly rake it in, or just step on it if you can, and then get it wet, or just let it rain, and it should germinate pretty well. So to finish off your question, yes, it can be done, and it can be a good idea, but it has to be done thoughtfully so as not to cause yourself issues down the line. Just follow the other rules of cover cropping, and you should be good to go. We've done extensive cover crop videos on our channel, and I really detailed them in the Living Soil Handbook, which, when you get that from no-tillgrowers.com, helps to support this work here, so that's rad. And you Patreon members get a discount code when you sign up that you can use at no-tillgrowers.com for anything from hats to books to whatever we sell. Thanks for the questions, Megan, and please keep them coming, Patreon members. For the last segment, let's get a little less technical and headed into the weekend or at least the Friday that I won't be here. Shall we? Be right back. Hey y'all, Farmer Jesse here. I just wanted to let you know that we have posted a bunch of discount codes over at our Patreon page at patreon.com/no-till-growers for our patrons over there. So if you love and appreciate our work and you could use a little break on the cost of seeds this year or on your irrigation supplies or boots or whatever, we have several discount codes available over at our Patreon page. Like I said, patreon.com/no-till-growers. So, just to be clear, that means for as little as $2 a month, you can save hundreds of dollars on your farming stuff this year. That's real. That page is so valuable to our work, and at a certain level, we'll even shout you out at the end of this show. Because you rock. That's it. Thanks, y'all. Enjoy the show. So, to end the week on an upbeat note, I want to talk about what I would grow here if I could grow anything. This is part of a question that came in on YouTube from William Curry, from at William Curry 185, who asked a separate question I want to save for a specific episode later, but who ended it with, what would you grow that is totally out of your USDA growing zone? Great question, and I think about it way too much. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to someone in, I think it was California, about how jealous I was of what they could grow there. And I think, to be polite, they said something like, oh yeah, well, I wish I could grow okra like you all. Which one, I think you can grow okra in most of California, but also two, there just isn't a lot that grows in Kentucky that can't be grown in California, so I'd A for effort. But on the opposite end, you have a lot in California I would love to be able to grow here, but it ain't happening. First, Kentucky is largely too humid for most fruits. Even if we can grow them, the disease just gets out of hand, and too cold for others. We can grow okay pears and mediocre apples, but we're too cold for most peaches and way too cold for citrus. We can grow okay strawberries and blueberries and a few grapes, plus pretty good watermelon. Again, I have fallen in love with growing seedless watermelons. It's been over the last few years, so I will be doing more on those at some point closer to the growing season, or maybe just at random. We'll see. A lot of this show is just based on what is on my mind when I start working on it. Anyway, most tree fruit is tough here. So to answer the question of what I would grow here that is not in my USDA hardiness zone, there are three things I would absolutely grow if I could. Avocados, oranges / basically any citrus, and cherries. We can grow sour cherries here, but big, dark, fat Bing cherries is my dream. I know they are laden with all sorts of gross pesticides when you get them from the store, but when cherry season hits, I just can't help myself. I eat myself sick on those things. Also, avocados. I got some this past spring from our friend Spencer at Sage Hill Ranch Gardens in Escondido, California. And I don't know if you've ever had a fresh organic avocado, but every time I'm just like completely blown away. That is the most special experience. And the citrus. When I was in California on that same trip, there was a citrus quarantine going on in Riverside, California, where I was speaking that week. And that meant untold amounts of oranges were just going to go to waste. I truly wanted to cry. What I wouldn't do to have a single orange tree and to see all those trees loaded with fruit just kind of going to waste was mind-blowing. Yeah, I'll trade you my ability to grow okra for one orange tree. Sorry, okra. It's been real. So you tell me, what would you grow that you can't in a perfect world where you don't have to worry about invasives or feeling bad about importing non-natives, those sorts of things? Let me know, and otherwise, you all have a great weekend. I will finish it out today with a Friday field note after our Patreon reads this Thursday. Even though it's Thursday, Friday field note for your weekend. And I will see you YouTube crowd on Sunday for a typical Farmer Jesse video. Still a few more of those coming before the end of the year. Shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music. It is also his birthday, so shouts to that. Also shout out to the team at No Till Growers for all their support. Make sure to join us over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Every paid member gets a shout out this month, whether it's $2 a month or $20 or whatever you can afford. Some tiers get multiple shout outs. Also, if you just bump up from one level to another, same thing. In the $10 tier, I'll do 2 shout outs instead of 1. So big shout outs today to, going for 100% today, Tim Morcom, Rusty, Outlier Garden, Outlier Gardener. You'd think I would get Gardener right. Rick, James Richards, AJ Burton, Greg Willerer. That was a challenging one, Greg, but I got it, I think. Kathy Yearwood, Byron Green, and Stephen Smith. Stephen, I feel like I probably am never going to mess your name up, but if I ever do, let me know. Appreciate you. Appreciate everyone who supports us in whatever way that you can. Thank you all for listening. Happy harvesting, happy weekend, and I'll leave you with your Friday field note this Thursday. All right. Have a great weekend. Bye. So I'm on a trip down to where Hannah and I used to live. It's called Gamea. It's spelled like Gamaliel or Gamaliel, but it's pronounced Gamea. And one of the things that I really, really love about this area, it's in sort of southern Kentucky, kind of about an hour and a half northeast of Nashville. And one of the things I really love about it is that every time you drive by somebody in this community, they lift a finger as if to say hi. And I think it's a few different things. One, most people know each other, so they're just, waving to say hi. But also it has this sort of element of like solidarity to it. This sort of, like, hey, we're in this together sort of thing. At least that's how I've always viewed it, is just like this sort of, hey, like I'm in the countryside too, and there's not a lot going on, and, glad to have you kind of thing. And no, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate some of these little quirks of the, more rural areas of our country. And, yeah, I think if you ever get a chance to go drive into, deep into Kentucky, I recommend Monroe County. It's nice. It's pretty. And people wave at you. All right. Have a good weekend.